Hello everybody, Anteater here. I have a deep, dark confession to make. In between testing for Kingdom Rush Alliance and Kingdom Rush Battles, I've been playing a lot of Kingdom Rush Vengeance. And worse, I've been having a lot of fun. So that's why I finally decided to make a Kingdom Rush Vengeance Tower tier list. I've had to sort of rush this video because I go to college in less than 10 days, so, so I haven't really had a lot of time to put that much effort into this, so I really hope you guys enjoy either way. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The tower with the honor of kickstarting our list is the one and only Rocket Riders, a tower that I think has been consistently the worst tower in the game for the entirety of Vengeance's lifespan. It's the epitome of a bad artillery, having two things that artillery does not want. It's expensive for how little damage it does, and it has an extremely small AoE on its basic attacks. Its only good trait out of the Space Tower being that it has a ridiculously long range, being that it can actually have some positional advantages in taking up worse tower spots. However, that's kind of it for the base tower. Its three skills also aren't that much to talk about. Defective Engines is easily the best of the three, having like a big AoE, but the damage per target isn't exactly amazing, and for a long 20-second cooldown, it's just not really amazing, but it's definitely the best of the three. Nitro Boosters is just kind of mid, as it's essentially just like a slightly better basic attack with longer range and a bit bigger AoE. However, at tier 1 it deals less damage than the basic attack, and at tier 2 its long range can still end up meaning it'll waste it on a single leaked enemy, rather than enemies closer by in a group. Finally, Minefield. It fucking sucks. Don't ever get Minefield. Its DPS is too low for how much fucking gold you spend on it. It's easily one of the worst skills in the game. So just don't fucking buy it. And anyways, all of this just combines like a mediocre damage and expensive and shitty kind of skills to make like the worst tower in the game. Period. Now, coming in with a fan favorite here, the Grim Cemetery. The Grim Cemetery can sometimes it has its good moments, however, it's completely unreliable in a lot of stages. Its biggest strength is obviously that it's the fucking cheapest tower in the game, period. So maxing it out is no issue whatsoever. Additionally, having 5 blockers at times can be really handy when there's crowds of enemies. However, admittedly, in Vengeance, there won't be a lot of crowds of enemies, so the 5 blockers might not always be reliable. Additionally, because of the unreliable nature of the spawning of the zombies, you can end up having zombies spawn outside of your choke point and just end up sitting there and doing nothing like a bunch of fucking idiots. And also the individual stats of each zombie is pretty low, like they just have a decent amount of health but no damage whatsoever. And then, in a similar vein to Rocket Riders, it doesn't really have that great skills. Zombie X Muscle Gain is actually a decent skill, as it just gives all of your zombies a flat health buff, and it's a pretty substantial one at that. So, there's no point in not buying it, but its other two skills are just shitty. Bloated Corpses is just the damage is bad, it's got a bad cooldown, and it can't even be reliably used on all of your zombies, as not only does it have a cooldown, it only activates on zombies that have died from or zombies that have been resurrected from previous enemies, so it's not even guaranteed. And Cold Grip is just like, it's a good skill on the wrong tower. The slow amount is decent. However, the issue with it is just that it's on a blocking tower. It's gonna be all the way in the back of your choke point. So there's no point in slowing enemies if they're just gonna get stalled. There's absolutely zero point in buying the skill. And overall, the tower is just kind of it can work in good stages that like work around its odd range and its odd spawning mechanic. So it's not terrible, but it's still too unreliable to be used in many situations, and with its mostly shitty skills, it can't really branch out and do much else either. Speaking of barracks, at our 20th spot we have the Orc Warrior's Den. They're in a similar vein to the Grim Cemetery, being cheap barracks. However, in a different vein, they're actually reliable. at tier 1 and 2, they can be used pretty reliably into the late game as just a decent 3-unit barrack, as though the only barrack in the game that are just like a reliable 3-unit one. However, the stat of each orc is actually pretty low, so even at T2, it's not going to be doing a lot. However, it's still just like a nice to have, and it's got some decent skills as well. Captain promotion essentially just makes one of your orcs into a mini hero, as it has pretty ridiculous stats, honestly, for 1 unit. However, it is only 1 unit, so it's not going to turn the tower into that much better of a staller. Bloodlust is another good skill, as the damage increase is actually very cost efficient for 3 units, especially with the captain promotion. So you can end up turning this tower into a pretty decent like fodder clearer, as they just mow down anything that doesn't have any armor. However, because of the mediocre defensive stats of each orc, it's not going to be able to get that much value once you start getting into some stronger enemies. Seal of Blood is, I don't know what to think of it. I always thought of it as the best skill, but it's recently I don't. It just kind of cements it as like a fodder clearer, as when you have the skill, they become a lot tankier into fodder enemies, but into everything else, it does pretty much nothing. So you kind of have to like, so if you want them to be your fodder clears, then definitely get the skill. But if you don't, then just don't get it. And overall, this tower, it's defined by either being a tier 1 spammed barrack or a tier 4 fodder clearer, and not really much else, which is why it remains at a low spot. Now at 19, we have, honestly, I think is a pretty slept on tower, the Shadow Archers. The Shadow Archers are just kind of like, and again, like the basic starting archer of the game, with like they're pretty cheap as Vengeance Towers goes, especially for archer, the cheapest archer in the game. However, their damage is admittedly a bit poor until you get to tier 4, where it becomes somewhat reliable. However, it's just that. It's just like reliable, you know? It's just like you can use it for good ranged damage, but it's not like exceptional, and it's not going to carry you through like flyer spam sometimes, or like the fucking parrots from Pirate Kings, you know? But it's certainly not a terrible tower. It also has a few decent skills. Shadow Mark, for instance. Shadow Mark found a lot of new use in Pirate Kings, as it's really good for countering bosses. However, it's still kind of mediocre. A 20-second cooldown for only 5 seconds of damage taken debuff isn't really amazing, admittedly. However, it's just okay, you know? It's just enough for the tower to not be bad. And then Blade of Demise is also just okay. It's pretty cheap to max out. However, if you just keep it at tier 1, it's the worst fucking insta kill in the game, because it's a 40-second insta kill cooldown insta kill, if I'm not mistaken, which is pretty bad. And overall, but if you max the skill out, it becomes pretty decent with a 24-second cooldown. However, every other insta kill in the game pretty much can have a shorter cooldown, except for not counting the orc den. Not the orc den, the swamp thing. So it's, you gotta pick and choose, you know. It's the also both skills kind of overlap in the sense where if Shadow Mark targets an enemy and then Blade of Demise also targets that enemy, then basically you've wasted both. You've wasted the damage increase pretty much, which kind of fucking sucks. And it's Shadow Mark is essentially a worse version of a skill a top tier tower has, but we're not gonna count that in the rankings. So overall, pretty decent. I'm not gonna talk about Crow's Nest. Do not buy Crow's Nest. That is all. Never buy Crow's Nest. And that is the Shadow Archer for you. Overall, it's just okay. You know, it's not the best, but it'll get you through the game. It'll get you through the game fairly well, but it won't like carry you or anything. 18. Okay, so at 18 we have the Rotten Forest. I've always loved this tower. I think it's one of my favorite towers in the game. However, realistically, it is not that good unless you're playing on casual. Um, it's it's got a few upsides in that it's really cheap, and the slow is nice. Like having a passive slow on anything is nice. It makes a lot of towers or heroes, to be honest, really strong. However, the damage on it is pretty shit. You know, all things considered, it's just bad. The damage on it cannot be relied on for reliable damage. However, it can sometimes soften down enemies unless they're armored. Oh yeah, that's another thing. This thing does physical damage instead of the normal explosive damage. So it cannot do anything. It's just if you want damage from this thing, you're shit out of luck, bud. But it's just like a decent supportive tower, and all of its skills are honestly pretty decent too. Roots of Evil, I think, is top 15 skill in the game. I think it's a very good stun for such a low price, and it's just a reliable skill. And then Treants, they're okay. They have some decent damage output if I'm being real, but with such low health and the decaying health, they can't really do that much reliably. However, it's just okay. And paired with the other skill, Fog of Despair, they can live longer, but Fog of Despair I just use for making everything live longer. You know, your reinforcements, your barracks, your other various summoned units like Bone Flinger, Skeletons. It's just overall a decent skill. And yeah, there's not really that much else to say about the tower. It's good for stalling, it's good for... Yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, now on to my favorite tower in the entire series, at number 17 is the Dark Knights. I think it's incredibly sad that I have to place them this low, but you know, they're certainly not bad. I think they're certainly the most balanced B tier tower in the game. You know, the biggest issue with them you can already see is that they're pretty expensive for a barrack. They're pretty much more expensive than almost every other barrack in the game, which kind of sucks for them. However, with such insane stalling capabilities, even at tier 1, it's no wonder. Like I swear to God, tier 1 Dark Knights can carry you through most of the game, just by virtue of how much they're stalling, you know? You never expect them to be that good, but they've got pretty good effective HP for a tier 1 barrack. However, another weakness of it, obviously, is that there's only 2 units, so they can't be reliably used in the crowds that much. But, you know, you win some, you lose some. Anyways, it's got some good skills. Brittle Strike I found to be is a very good insta-kill, honestly, as it might be expensive, but once you max it out, you'll find the insta-kill to be happening a lot more often than not, which is incredibly handy, and I think it kind of turns it into like a Assassin's Light, you know, getting off insta-kills, but not as much. And then Armor of Thorns kind of alleviates the crowd weakness, as it just makes them insane for clearing out fast attacking enemies. And what kind of enemies are fast attacking? The ones that come in crowds. So you can pretty reliably get a clear out crowds more with them. So they kind of alleviates that weakness, but not entirely. You know, into armored enemies, the damage it's effectively worthless. So it's always reliable to buy though. I wouldn't recommend not buying it. You know, you should always buy it. Um, and then Impervious. No, don't even bother with Impervious. It might be useful like in one niche scenario, but then you're sacrificing fun and sacrificing getting the insta kill and sacrificing your soul just to get this stupid fucking skill. Yeah, don't buy Impervious, buy the other skills. Dark Knights, love the tower. It's great. And yeah. I also just wanted to preface that I do not have a lot of time to record these lines. So I'm not even gonna I'd rather shoot myself than have to go back and re-record these if I have to. So if there's any issues with my voicing for this, go fuck yourself. No, I'm just kidding. You know what I mean though. Alright, see ya. Next time. Now, coming in at number 16 is another favorite tower of mine, the Sandworm Hollow. This is a big boy and is known for being a big fucking boy. First off, it's incredibly expensive. It's somehow not the most expensive, it's still the second most expensive tower in the game. However, it does a lot of damage. I can't quite recall if it's that cost efficient. However, it's still a ton of damage. At tier 4, it's shredding everything, you know? You know, it's like expensive, but it's worth it. It also has all around some pretty decent skills. Snack Hour is the staple skill for the tower, and I found especially in Pirate Kings, this skill generally gets a ton of value. Just having an AoE insta kill is pretty strong. However, when it's on a 45-second cooldown, it kind of gets to that point where it's like, it's not completely reliable, but you know, when it works pretty fuck. It's kind of like having a hero spell on a tower, funnily enough. Um, Mucuscov is also just like decent, you know, it's just like a slow. I mean, it's got a long range, so it can support when it's not attacking, because the tower does have a pretty short range. I forgot to mention that. It's got a pretty short range, which is a big issue for it, but you know, you want something else, I'm gonna be saying that a lot here. Um, but you know, it's just a slow, you know, it's not bad, it's not good, but you know, it's just average. And then Call of the Desert, it's all right. It's not that amazing because you can't spam the tower to begin with, so you can't build up an army of the worms. But on its own, the worms they have pretty okay stats and they spawn pretty fast, so you can end up building up a kind of good army, a kind of decently sized army, or just having the additional stallers every 10 seconds is nice, you know. So overall, it's a very expensive tower, but with the right investment, it can deal some good damage and then also have some decent supportive qualities. Now, coming at 15, the best starting tower of them all, we have the Infernal Mage. The Infernal Mage is a pretty decent tower, honestly. I never thought of it to be that good, but with more gameplay, it's honestly just quite reliable. You know, it's got a decent cost, it's got good damage, and overall, if you need a mage tower and you don't know what to put in, this is like the one of the most basic mage towers you can get, and because of how reliable it is, it ends up helping it more. You know, having a reliable like Shadow Archers and Orc Den, they're like quote unquote reliable, but they're not like great. Like the Infernal Mage, it's reliable while also actually having some pretty good stats, even in comparison to other towers. So you know, might as well get it. You know, like if you're gonna bring a mage power, you can bring this if you want. It's also got some nice skills. Lava Fissures, I fucking love this skill. It deals an insane amount of single target damage, but in an AoE, so you just get, you know, there's no point not getting it. It just deals so much damage, especially to bigger targets like elephants or megalodons or you know the usual bullshit, and it's great. Infernal Portal, you know, it's just a teleport skill, but you know it's honestly pretty decent. You know, like teleport skills are always like 50-50. They're either like you shouldn't buy it or might as well buy it. That other thing isn't really 50-50, but it's just decent, you know. It's one of the it's compared to other teleport skills in the series, it ends up being pretty good. And then Affliction, I used to fucking hate this skill because I always thought like, you know, you know, resist armor. I thought it only reduced the armor. It reduces the armor and the magic resistance, which is pretty bonkers. You feel? So, especially into like magic resistant enemies, it normally wouldn't do much against like genies or sand. I forgot their names. Sand mystics. Sand mystics. Yes. Sand mystics. You know, it ends up being a really nice, and also for supportive reasons, like for into armored enemies. Then obviously it's going to be pretty good for your archers and artilleries and your whatnots. So yeah, I think I really like this tower. I think it's all around a really reliable one, and you know, it's a good tower. Uh, okay, I'm sorry for those previous few ones. I just realized now, looking back on it, that the quality of my mic, that I was kind of screaming into the fucking microphone. So just bear with me on those ones. I'll try to, if I have time, I'll put in closed captions. If I don't, good luck. I'm not going back to redo those. I'm too fucking tired for this shit. Anyways, on to number 14 is the Goblin War Zeppelin. Speaking of expensive towers, this is the most expensive tower in the game, bar none. And kind of bad in a similar vein to the Rocket Riders. It's got a small AoE on its basic attack, but it still retains really good range because of the rally property it has. And also the single target damage on this tower is ridiculous. So you're actually getting what you're spending for it. It's a lot of damage and it's really quick too. So it's like it's not like you have to wait a while. Like you're getting constant AoE damage, which is always nice. It also has some like okay skills. Paratrooper. It's got a pretty high DPS, honestly, and you can put the paratrooper in one place and then put the Goblin War Zeppelin in a different place and just get spread out damage, which is always handy. And then Tar Bomb, it's like super cheap, so it's like might as well get it. And the slow on it is honestly pretty nice. So it's just okay. The uptime on it leaves a little bit to be desired, but you know, you win some, you lose some. And then finally, Goblin Scout. I don't get the skill. However, for some towers like Rotten Forest or Melting Furnace, or even like other range towers like Shadow Archers or Shaolin Temple, or you know, it's just pretty nice to have. You know, it's like having a range boost. But you know, I don't buy it. But if you buy it, it can end up being pretty nice. And overall, it's just the biggest weakness is that it's insanely expensive and it's got a small AoE, but it can deal some pretty good damage and have some pretty reliable supportive abilities as well. Yeah, speaking of greenskins, at number 13 we have the Orc Shaman. The Orc Shaman used to be the second worst tower in the game because it just had insane damage range, but now, after Hammerhold, it's got good buffs. The tower is expensive, admittedly, but now it has high damage, and additionally having a stun on its basic attack, being one of the 3 main towers in the game having an innate stun. And if having that, and that stun makes up for how expensive the tower. Like, you know, it has like a similar DPS to the Infernal Mage, but it costs more, and that stun completely makes up the extra cost. It is really good as a descent as like into magic resistant enemies. Now, oh, instead of just dealing no damage, it deals no damage, but it stuns them. You know, it's just a really strong innate mechanic to have. And it's also got a long range, so it can keep attacking enemies consistently too. But honestly, its skills are kind of mediocre. Meteor Shower, it's in a similar vein to Lava Fissures, but the AoE of it is worse because of like it's multiple meteors with individual AoE, and they kind of like shower around in a circle. So it's a lot harder for them to hit the same target. But you know, it's still good. It's cheap. So this is cheap AoE damage. You know, might as well. Healing Roots is way too niche, unless you're using Dark Knights specifically. I would never buy the skill. It's cheap, sure, but the AoE, but the healing on it is just kind of mediocre. And for a healing skills generally need to have insane stats. Oh, sorry. Healing skills generally need to have insane stats for them to be decent, just because of by virtue of them being so niche. So when this one just has mediocre ones, it's not going to end up being a worth it skill to get. And kind of similar to Static Shock. Static Shock is like on paper the DPS is nice, but in practice it's like not. Like in practice, it doesn't like it's not really a lot. Even in like crowds of weaker enemies, you're not really seeing it deal a lot of damage, and it's got such a small AoE that it doesn't really matter anyways. So I wouldn't get the skill either. Just get Meteor Shower and then you're set. But overall, it's a tower with an innate stun, so that's just gonna make it strong in general. Now, coming in at number 12, we have the Swamp Thing. This is Vengeance's, like, resident sniper tower. It's got a huge fucking range. I'm pretty sure it's the longest range in the game, at least that base tower. And it's just crazy how flexible it is because of this range. And then, it also still has good damage. It is a little expensive for the damage. However, with the range you get from it, it's more than worth it in my opinion. And it also has the melee form, which personally I never really liked. However, it for certain strategies, if you're not relying on it as an archer, it can work well because it A never dies and B works well with his main skill, Blinding Liquid. Blinding Liquid is just a cheap, great skill. You know, it can essentially perma-stun enemies, or not essentially, it can perma-stun enemies if you get lucky enough. It can perma-stun enemies if you get lucky enough, and in melee form, it can also hit any enemy hit by the AoE of the Swamp Thing's attack. So you can essentially perma-stun crowds of enemies if you get really lucky. These other two skills, again, they're not much to talk about. Smash is an insta-kill, or an insta-kill chance that is so low to the point where you can never ever rely on it compared to every other insta-kill in the series even. And but it is dirt cheap, so it's like, you know, might as well if you've got extra gold. And Carnivore is in a similar vein because it's the heal amount is really nice. It's really cheap, but with how low damage the Swamp Thing does, you can't like you can't rely on it to kill enemies and then get the healing from that. So overall, it's like a decent skill. Like, again, they're both Smash and Carnivore. Like, you know, might as well get, and you might occasionally see some value from them. However, you're not going to consistently see value from them like you will with almost every other skill in the game. I really like Swamp Thing. I think it's a pretty good tower, and I think it is deserving of the spot. Now, on to another favorite tower of mine in the game. We've got the Melting Furnace. This tower, I think, is pretty slept. I think this tower is pretty slept on, honestly. I think it's really good, and I think a lot of people don't talk about it enough. It's the second tower with an innate stun effect. I'm sorry. It's the second tower with an innate stun effect in the game, which is really good. And while the damage is low, it has two things to make up for that. First, obviously, it has the stun, but it also has like insane AoE coverage because it covers the entire AoE or its entire range, which is nice. But also, instead of traditional explosive damage where it only pierces 50% of armor, it instead pierces 75% of armor, meaning it gets penalized less for damaging armored enemies, which overall boosts its effectiveness into armor and overall increases its DPS, which I think is really nice. But the main issue with it is that the damage is still a little low. Into like unarmored enemies, it's still like it's like about the same as the Rotten Forests, which to give you a good idea about how much damage it's dealing. But you know, it's still okay for how fairly cheap it is. Then it's got a bunch of pretty decent skills, honestly. Abrasive Heat's OP. I think Abrasive Heat is the second best skill in Vengeance, tower skill in Vengeance. It's just with how insane the AoE it is, and with recent levels getting added in, like the Coliseum or whatever Malik's fight is, and Treasure Island, it has so many opportunities to get more coverage from Abrasive Heat. And it's the increase the 30% damage increase is also a pretty nice number for a lot of towers to just permanently have. So overall, it also pairs well with a lot of other top tier towers. So I think it's definitely an amazing skill. Burning Fuel, I think, is also pretty good. It takes advantage of the tower's innate stun effect, and it allows it to stun enemies a lot more frequently, or a lot better, for a short amount of time, so you can essentially crowd enemies together more, or disrupt enemy waves more, or just it alleviates the defense a lot, which is very nice. But Red Hot Coals, I think, is the lowest point. It's really cheap, but with how slow the damage comes out and how like weird the AoE is, it doesn't really end up doing much. And I don't think I could recommend buying the skill frequently unless you have like maxed everything else out, you know? And overall, I think Melting Furnace, great tower, great skills, great everything. It's one of the best support towers in the game. Now, we're in the top 10 big boys here. This is like, these are going to be like the top 10. These are all like going to be amazing towers from here on out for almost every situation. And first off, we have the Spectral Mausoleum. I like this guy. It's really good. First off, it's one of the cheaper towers in the game. So even while it does have low damage, you're able to buy it really easily and get to its skills, which are a lot better to talk about. It has like the Archmage bolt storing where it passively stores attacks up to 3, which can help if it's like not attacking and wants to burst down a certain enemy, but overall it's not like an amazing attribute to have for a tower like this. Um, Speaking of which, it's one of his skills, Spectral Communion, is dog shit. It just increases the total amount of bolts it can store, which I don't know if you knew this. That's not going to be very helpful, and you'll never see it actually impacting your defense at all, especially when compared to its other skills. Shut up! Shut it! Please! Shut up! Shut up! Sorry. Uh, First we have Guardian Gargoyles, which is an amazing skill. Both gargoyles that you can summon have really good stats, honestly. So it just like bolsters your defense a lot more and allows you to run a little bit more like less barracky setups. Like you don't really need to run orcs, or you won't need to level them up, any of your barracks up at least, which is nice. And then possession just takes us up to the max. Or with It's really good in a game like this where there's so many enemies that have special effects that you can take advantage of, like the Hanged King and like Ape Mates. You get a lot of value from the special abilities of these enemies. and it overall just makes this tower really good on defense, and like it pretty much makes like an unstoppable wall of gargoyles and then enemies, and then even if it targets a weaker enemy, that pretty much seals their fate. Like that enemy is dead guaranteed. So at least you're still getting some value for targeting a weaker enemy. And overall, I think it's a great skill, great tower overall. One of the best supported, is slightly better supportive tower than the melting furnace, but a great supportive tower nonetheless. Next up, we have a fan favorite in the series. We've got the Bone Flingers. These guys are great, although I think I've recently seen them not performing as well as I previously thought, which is why I think they're only at ninth. However, I still think they're a great skill, or a great tower, sorry. First off, obviously, they're mega cheap. They're the cheapest, they're second cheapest tower in the game, and because of this, they're still very cost efficient, even at base, where their damage seems low, it's still great. And so far, they have two big weaknesses. First, they've got a short attack range, but then they also have complete RNG attack targeting, which, I don't know if you knew this, RNG kind of sucks. And especially when it's on an archer tower that you will normally rely on for like targeting flying enemies or leaked enemies or stuff like that, it ends up being a tower that you cannot rely on to like catch leaks or flying enemies or things like rushing monkeys, and that is a huge hit against the tower, I think, especially with Pirate Kings. But overall, it's still good. Got Milk is a great skill. You know, it essentially just increases the DPS by like 20 something, which is still by like almost 30, which is crazy. And it essentially turns this tower into like kind of like a semi artillery with how much it's just like throwing out damage. And then Walking Dead, also pretty OP. I'd say it's slightly better, just because building up an army is better, and the Got Milk doesn't have the best cost efficiency. And in the scenarios where Walking Dead is just better than the Sandworms Call of the Desert, because while stat wise it is pretty much just worse, you're able to build up an army so much easier because of how cheap the base bone flingers are, you know? It's a lot easier to build up an army of skeletons on like a 500 total cost than on a 1000 total cost, you know? So I think overall it's a great skill. And then Bonum, he's Bonum. He doesn't really, I don't really like him that much. He's decent because the range attack of the Bonum actually has pretty solid DPS, and it doesn't have the great defensive stats, so I end up just using him more of like a additional 20 DPS in range, which it is actually pretty cost efficient. However, it doesn't end up like having that big of an impact over the course of a match or a level. So I wouldn't recommend buying the skill unless you need the extra flying anti-air damage, you know? And overall, this tech tower is just the quintessential mega cheap spam tower, because there's so many strategies with it where you just mega cheap spam, and it's hilarious. Now we have like one of the most iconic towers in this game is the Deep Devil's Reef. It's the first example of a true hybrid tower, having both a mage and a barrack form at all tiers. And individually, the barrack form sucks, individually, the mage form sucks. They're both way too cost inefficient. But when you have both at the same time, you end up getting a really versatile tower that can do a lot. Um, Again, it is one of the most expensive, one of the more expensive towers in the game, which is a knock against it. However, it's so versatile that I think it ends up still being a great tower for how much you're spending on it. Um, so and something else that's kind of slept on is once you get tier 4, the green fins turn into red spines that have a ranged attack. And while it might look low, it boosts the tower quite a bit actually. It turns this into one of, if not the best anti-air towers in the game, with how much bonus damage you get from both the mage and both red spines. And that's taken even further once you get chosen of the sea, which boosts this range damage even more. And it's just cheap, so like I don't understand why you wouldn't buy it. And in the off chance that you're using it for stalling, you get bonus stalling, and then when you need the range damage, you get the extra range damage. You know, it's great. And then his other two skills, I wouldn't get though. Perfect Storm, I think it's just bad. Like the single target DPS, even when you max it out, is horrible, you know? And it's gets wasted even more when you use it on like a weak enemy that'll end up dying before like all the storm happens. Although sometimes I do find it funny to just get tier 1 of the skill, and if it gets used on a big enemy, it can like further stall them with the periodic stuns, which honestly is kind of helped my defense quite a bit, especially when you're using like Dark Knights or Orcs or just anything that stalls well. It ends up being kind of funny, but I wouldn't recommend maxing it out. Net throw is also not really good. It's a stun, where on paper it's good, but the fact it turns enemies invincible is terrible. Literally, if it did not do that, this would be like a solid B tier skill. But because it isn't, it's easily one of the worst skills in the game. However, it's kind of like with Impervious, where every like once a blue moon you can buy the skill, and oh, it'll like alleviate some of the enemies from the defense, and look, you can kill the other ones easier. But because enemy towers still target those invincible enemies, it's like you can end up just wasting more resources. So it's I wouldn't don't get the skill. But overall, this tower is still great for it's still great versatility because hit magic reliably. You can hit through magic, hit magic resistance reliably because of the unit red spines, while still getting through armor because of the mage. And it's just a great tower. Now we've got a tower, a very disgraced tower. Number 7, we've got the Blazing Gem. Oh, seen as the best tower in the game once. That was so long ago. Nah, but it's still a very good tower, but its issues are glaring now that we've had more experience with it and with the new DLCs and with its changes it's gotten. First off, again, it's the third most expensive tower in the game, and however, it still ends up being cost efficient with its third tier phase, which is just still insane damage. However, it still is something to talk about with the phases, where it does take a second for it to actually start dealing damage, which makes it worse into a lot of fodder enemies than every other mage pretty much. However, it still does a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong. And to any big enemy, it's the best tower in the game to deal with them. It does have the funny targeting, which does end up helping it more than harming it. Although it does have situations where it can harm it and make it harder to like move to like stun enemies or direct them to make it easier for the Blazing Gem to target it. It's harder for this tower than it is for a traditionally targeting tower. You know, it still is okay. It does have some pretty good skills though. Gem of Amplification is fucking crazy. It's 50 DPS. It's a 50 DPS for 170 gold. Even if for the time you're waiting for it, it's still fucking bonkers. So I don't think I think there's literally no reason in not buying the skill immediately after buying the Blazing Gem. It's very strong. Um, its other two skills, I don't really know what to talk about them. Destructor Ray, it's an insta kill. You know, it's just an insta kill, which just kind of go against this tower's like main role of being like the big single target enemy destroyer. It's like, oh, if you're already destroying the enemies, why get the insta kill? But if an enemy does have magic resistance that it can't normally deal with, it's nice. It's good. Don't level it up though. It's extremely cost inefficient for its tier 2 and 3. So just get tier 1 and just leave it be. Oh, that rhymed. Um, Unstable power is also just okay because the way enemies are spaced in Vengeance is very rare for the AoE to actually hit, but the damage on it is very good. So if you ever end up having very close together enemies, it's a nice skill to have. But otherwise, I wouldn't count on it being too reliable. Overall, great tower. Still is very sluggish at times, so that's why it's only at 7th. And finally, not finally, and now topping out right before the S tier, the top 5, we have the Elite Harassers. This might come as a shock to you all, but I don't think Elite Harassers make it into the top 5 in this game, personally at least. I think it has. First off, let's get through the strengths. It's extremely cheap, and it's got very high damage. You know, it's for an art. When you're using it as like an archer tower, it deals a lot of damage. However, it does have some issues that come with that. Like, unless you have really specific placements of the tower, you have to support it a lot. It requires a lot of support for enemies to not go into melee combat with them, and then you're ending up with them just going into melee combat and getting way less value. That is a bit of an issue, especially in the early game. Another issue with them is that I found them to not into fast enemies, even like flying enemies, they can't target them reliably. They almost always waste 2 shots, and which is a lot more of a weakness than most archer towers that generally only waste like 1 shot on like a dead or like a fast enemy, which is a huge knock against them because it decreases their DPS a lot more because there's 2 of them. But then everything else about them is great, I think. Even with you wanting them to be in ranged combat, in melee combat, they can actually stand pretty well. They've got decent effective HP and can still good damage. Backstab is just furthers that. It makes them even more tanky into single target enemies. However, again, don't put them in melee combat. Please don't put them in melee combat. Even with Fear of the Twilight, again, it's decent. They deal more damage when they're dead or whatever, and it actually doesn't affect the respawn time, which is pretty good, honestly, which makes the skill a lot better. But overall, I wouldn't buy it because I'd rather just them not die to begin with. But then Aerostorm is fucking ridiculous. That deals so much damage, and it actually allows this tower to be good at even killing armored enemies, like even like elephants or 8 mates or something, just because of how much damage it does. However, it does have the big weakness of missing a lot of its shots a lot of the time. It like never retargets its shots, so if an enemy dies while they're targeting them, which is more often than not because of how much damage the skill deals, you're just wasting like 200, 300 damage. Like, it's crazy how much damage you can waste. But overall, it's still this tower deals so much damage that I think it's impossible for me not to put it at least at the top of the A tier. Yeah. So now, starting out the S tier, we have the Gobblerangs. I love this tower. I think it's great that they got buffed in Hammerhold, and now they're an absolute beast. Starting off, they're fairly cheap, and they still have better single target damage than the Shadow Archers, but they also hit any enemy within the arc of the boomerangs that they throw, which ends up being a lot of fucking damage, especially in the late game when there's more crowds, and it's honestly quite easy to get a good tower spot to line up its attacks. It just deals a lot of damage overall, and I think even if it was just the base tower, it's still, like, just the base tower alone boosts it to S tier, I think. But it also has a couple of good skills that I think are worth mentioning. Biggerang, it's just cheap damage. It's just cheap, efficient damage. I don't see any reason to not buy this skill. It's just really good to have, I think. I always buy it. Angry Bees is just kind of like a worse version of Biggerang in terms of just pure cost efficiency. However, because of how it operates, it can end up sometimes hitting even more enemies than Biggerang, which is something to point out. And it's just kind of expensive though. That's the biggest thing against it. However, it's still decent damage. Headbang is the only skill that I don't really like to buy, just because the chance is pretty low. So unlike Swamp Thing's Blinding Liquid, you can't really like stun enemies as reliably or as permanently in a sense. But because it can hit crowds, it can end up still being a decent crowd control option. And overall, it's just a great tower. Its biggest issue is still that you kind of have to get a specific tower spot for it to get the most out of its AoE attack. But as long as it's hitting like hitting like 3 enemies or 2 enemies, you're still getting a lot of value from it, and it'll end up hitting more with its basic attack and its skills alike. And overall, amazing tower. Next up, we've got another archer tower, the Shaolin Temple. Oh boy, isn't this a tower. It's in the same vein as Orc Shaman and Melting Furnace, where the stun makes up for its low damage. However, unlike that, this tower is actually fucking cheap. Spamming this tower, even at tier 1, leads to ridiculous stalling potential, and it can end up even perma-stalling certain enemies. So if you're just spamming like 2 or 3 of them around, you're just getting a ton of just passive CC without really having to do anything, which is insane. And it also has the damage, while it is low, it's still, like, with the support of other towers, you're able to kill, like, flying enemies really easily, like, any rush, like, it's one of the best towers for Parrot Kings, just because of how easily you can counter the bomb parrots and the rushing monkeys, like, so easily, because of the passive stun and the multi-targeting. Speaking of skills, this thing has 3 amazing skills. Lion of Abundance, that's just free gold. While it does take quite a bit of gold to end up giving you more gold than it took to cost, late game, it just gives you tons and tons and tons of gold, which is amazing. Shaolin Monks, it's cheap, extra damage, and more stuns. On paper, by the way, this doubles your DPS for like a third of the tower's cost, which is pretty fucking good. Even while the damage overall isn't like too much to be desired, it's still making it insane into crowds, and again, making it into a sort of semi-artillery. Dragon Warrior, also great. It's in the same vein as Gem of Amplification, where it's 50 damage per second for 170 gold. Like, and the unit's pretty decently tanky too, so it was one of the best skills in the game for just purely shredding down fodder enemies and eventually tanking bigger enemies late game, which is great. And I think overall this tower is an insane support tower that can still dish out some pretty good damage overall. And that's why I think it cements itself as the fourth best in Vengeance. Next up, we've got another unsuspecting goat, the Wicked Sisters. This tower used to be seen as terrible by people for some fucking reason, because they always used it in magic mode without realizing that poison mode deals more damage, and then they got buffed. So now these guys have a 99 DPS true basic attack at tier 4, with while the rally range is short, the individual range of the sister is really big. So even without any skills, it's great. But then you get the skills. Fragification is just kind of like Polymorph, where it's just like an insta-kill, where you just get tier 1, it's just fine, I guess, but I don't think it's anything worth talking about. Nimbus 4000 is the skill you want to get. It's dirt cheap, and it like almost doubles the tower's range, turning it into an insane tower for global presence. You're able to put this tower in essentially any tower spot and get good value from it because of this range. It allows it to follow big enemies so much more easier. And speaking of big enemies, I forgot to mention, this tower has fucking smart targeting, where sometimes against certain enemies, it'll target them with its basic attack, and it'll target stronger enemies with this basic attack, like 8 mates or bosses, which is fucking insane for such a high damage attack. And this tower is dirt cheap, so you have insane damage potential for one of the cheapest mage, for I think the second cheapest mage tower in the game, which is fucking ridiculous. The only reason why I don't have it higher is because it sucks horrendously into crowds, where most other mages have some form of crowd control where that this tower does not. However, it's still easily the third best tower in the game, and I don't really think there's any much more to say about it. It's fucking broken. Oh, I forgot to mention Hex Totem. Don't buy that. Just don't buy Hex Totem. It's good in like maybe 2 scenarios, but that's 2 scenarios. Don't buy Hex Totem. No, please don't. Now, what was the previous best tower in the game for a long time? We have the Ignis Altar, the second best in the game. First off, it's incredibly cheap. And before we start talking about how everything else is great, let's start talking about its biggest weakness, is that the base tower is kind of hard to work around. Without, like, any skills, the base attack doesn't really do a whole lot unless you're stalling enemies, because of, like, how the damage kind of trickles out. Well, the damage is good, again, it trickles out. However, let's start getting into it. First off, the tower has a very long range, and a big AoE, and, most importantly, it's fucking cheap. These are all amazing traits to have for an artillery tower. And it makes it a lot easier to work around. You can get it in the early game. And you want to get it in the early game because of the single best tower skill in the game, True Fire. This skill is broken in so many ways. Having a 50% slow in every attack with that big of an AoE just lets you stall. It's essentially having Ice Scald the tower, You just stall enemies so easily, it's unreal. And it's also really cheap too for how much you're getting from it. And because it essentially doubles the amount of time that enemies are standing in the pools, it effectively doubles the amount of damage this tower is able to deal in certain scenarios, which is broken. Or it's just like, if you think about that on paper, that's 40 DPS turned into 80 DPS. Ludicrous damage, ludicrous speed. Its other 2 skills are also really good. Burning Elemental, it is the weakest of his skills, however, it's just a big tanky unit. Might, you know, if you want to get an extra third unit for your defense, you might as well get this skill. But then single extinction is also an insane skill because it's essentially Shadow Mark, but better in every way imaginable. It's it is more expensive, I think, slightly more expensive. However, it's still fairly cheap. It lasts for 10 seconds, lasts for twice as long, and it has the bonus of exploding enemies when they die. So even if it targets a weaker enemy, you're getting value up from it, but it won't even target a weaker enemy because it has fucking smart targeting. This thing it'll target the strongest enemy in its range, which is I don't even know what to say about it. You're like any enemy in that range that gets targeted by it, it's fucking dead. 10 seconds of double damage taken. Who even made that? Who even thought about that on a tower that already has true fire? The Ironhide devs, I love you, but come on. Come on. This tower is just so broken, and it really puts into perspective how broken the next tower is going to be if this is already that insane. Speaking of which, let's get into the number one tower in the game. Now, for the best tower in the game, and in contention for the best tower in the series, we have the Ogre Shipwreck, added in Pirate Kings. This tower, I don't even know what to say. I don't know how, during testing, we must have all been high out of our minds to not realize how broke. I vividly remember during testing when we first got this tower, within the first week or two, we put it in like top of B tier. I don't know what the fuck we were thinking because of how broken this tower is. First off, tier 1, it is the best tier 1 tower in the game, bar none. You get 500 health and like 30 AoE, 30 DPS from this huge tanky unit. Huh? And then tier 2 is a little bit weaker. However, a stat buff for the big guy plus an additional little staller, always handy. Tier 3 is when you get the archer part of it, the musketeer, where again the DPS is low, but just because you also have two, where it's like by kind of like the DDR, the Deep Devil's Reef, where by virtue of you also having two units, it's always handy to have, and it's just nice, you know, it's just extra DPS. And then tier 4, you've got the artillery. The artillery is actually, I think, is better than the musketeer because it's AoE damage and it's explosive damage, so it even lets it where the tower mostly deals physical damage. The explosive damage is nice for dealing with armor more, but you don't even need to deal with armor. It deals a lot of fucking damage, and it has the skills, however, are a little bit weak. Where Musket Rage is OP. It's so cheap. It's just cheap mega DPS. I don't really know what. It's like kind of like Aerostorm light. However, it's still a lot of damage, and I think this burst damage is really for a tower like this. It helps out a ton because the range damage normally isn't amazing, but now you have a ranged nuke. You know, better crew is decent. You know, it's just more damage, more armor. You know, you might as well get it. And then Goblin Launcher is also decent, as again, it's just a third unit, which is just crazy for stalling. So overall, you have a tower that has insane stalling capabilities, insane damage potential, insane damage even more, and the possibility for even AoE damage too. This tower is the best tower I think I've ever seen, and I'm surprised we let it slip under the cracks. It is insanely fun, which is why I hate it so much. It's so fun, but it's so broken. You know, if you want to get Pirate Kings and you haven't yet, and you want a fun but really strong tower, get get it. You know, just fucking get it. I don't know what else to say about it. This tower is so unbelievably broken that it defies all logic. You can spam it in every situation and win. It's technically it's like you'd think it'd be less versatile than the Deep Devil's Reef because can't really like deal with armor well, but no, it actually does, and it actually does even better than Deep Devil's Reef in a lot of scenarios when you're spamming it, which is hilarious, but also kind of sad. And overall, wow. Ogre Shipwreck is the best in the series. And yeah, that is every tower in Kingdom Rush Vengeance ranked from worst to best. I'm also I'm gonna leave up like the accurate tier list because I know I didn't like exactly say all of like the S, A, B, or C tiers, so this will just clear things up. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. It is kind of sad that this might be my last YouTube video before going to college, and I won't be able to upload really anything because I'll be in college. But you know, I might join a stream here or there. You know, I might like I'll still be posting my shit rants on Reddit. Um, yeah, if you guys want to talk with me at all or discuss anything about my tier list at all, you could join the Ironhide Discord and talk to me through there, or you could just add me to your own Discord servers and yell at me through there, or just yell at me in the comments. No, I get yelled at quite frequently, so I wouldn't mind it. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good day.